here we are, Talbot Street.
Everybody's come through the doors of this building, haven't they? And all sorts of things.
Yeah, they've come through for complaints, confessions to murder, and of course Jerry Hutch snuck in this building as well late at night one night and did an interview.
And flowers.
And flowers.
Don't forget the flowers, because we're going to tell all these stories at the Cork Podcast Festival, which is our show's actually on the 30th of March in the Opera House. Tickets are on sale from the corkpodcastfestival.ie, and they're selling fast. We've only got, 2 weeks left?
2 weeks left, yeah.
So Dave Mahon is back in the news because he's been acquitted of this sort of assault on a pensioner, occurred allegedly during a barbecue in 2021. Dave Mahon, most people, that might find themselves caught up in this sort of a not that serious case, maybe we wouldn't be reporting on. But Dave Mahon's background is very intriguing. He has been in a long-term relationship with the mother of Amy Fitzpatrick, who's missing in Spain since 2008.
2008, yeah. New Year's Day, 2008.
And she's Audrey Fitzpatrick. Her other child, her son, Dean, was killed by Mahan, her partner. He was convicted of manslaughter in that case. We'll come on to all that. But I suppose we start with why he's back in the papers. And he has done an interview with Paul Healy there in the Irish Mirror. And he has talked about he wasn't a bit violent. There was a bit of an affray at a barbecue. He's been a bit smart arse about the kind of headlines that might be around the story. And
yeah, because he was only out of prison around a month for, like, as you said, he was convicted of killing his stepson and served 5 years. And in the interview he gave following the acquittal in the assault case, he said, they were basically, out to get me and trying to get me back in prison.
The state.
The state, essentially,
right.
Yeah. So he was saying things along those lines and said that he was defending himself. And that was obviously his case. But the judge directed the jury to acquit because there was 3 witnesses in the case. So the victim, Jim Fahey's an OAP, he's currently in a hospital for different reasons. So he had given a statement to withdraw his statement to the guards, and he basically said that he didn't want it to continue with his cooperation in the case.
That was in 23.
Yeah, that was in 23. But there was also other witnesses, and essentially only one of them turned up. And the one that did turn up basically said in the stand that he didn't want to be there. And I think how he ended up was that the judge was asking where the witnesses were. And, they'd made efforts to call them and then they happened to cross one of them on the street. So he did come then because obviously, like, you can be compelled to turn up.
Yeah.
But I suppose that was the only, and he did give evidence saying, we can go into what happened, but, saying that Jim Fahey was on the ground and was seriously injured. But he also did kind of say that he didn't want to be there. So the judge was basically saying that without the other witnesses, the victim's cooperation, that, would be unsafe to put it to a jury. So he was acquitted on the basis that, like, he wasn't found not guilty, but the judge directed the jury to acquit before the trial hadn't really gotten underway. So,
and if found guilty on this, Mahan would have been probably assured to go back to prison because of his criminal pedigree.
Yeah, and you can get up to 5 years for...
So he is in a relationship with Audrey Fitzpatrick for years and years, since her 2 children, Amy and the late Dean, were children.
Yes.
And they moved to Spain.
Yeah, they did. So they moved to Spain before Amy disappeared. And I suppose she was around, I don't know if she was maybe 13, 14 at the time. She was 15 when she disappeared. And I suppose at that age, teenagers, they're happy with their friends at home and their school and the area. So, maybe there was a sense that they didn't want to go, but they went with them anyway. She was a minor and she disappeared. So on New Year's Eve, she went to her friend's, I think her name was Ashley Rose's house, and she spent New Year's Eve with Ashley and her mother. And she was on her way home the following night. So it would have been New Year's Day in 2008. And around 10 o'clock, and it was a 10-minute walk to her home, and she's never been seen since. And she'd been living in Spain. Dean was over there as well. He was a few years older. And she'd been living in Spain with Audrey and Dave. Dave had a good job on the Costa del Sol. I think it was near Fungarola.
Was he selling real estate or something?
Yeah, he was selling real estate. So they had obviously met and fell in love, and she'd moved over to be with him. And took her children with her. So after Amy disappeared, they moved home. And then in 2013, so a few years later, there was a row between Dean and Dave. Well, there's obviously two sides of the story, but essentially Dean, so he was Amy's older brother, died of a stab wound, a single stab wound to his chest. And it was claimed by Dave that, Dean, there was a row, somebody had taken a water bottle from a bike or something, and there was a row over this, and that he was trying to say that Dean was suicidal and essentially walked into his knife. Now, he was tried for murder, and the jury found him guilty of manslaughter, which is killing, but it's not, obviously, it's not
intentional.
It's not, it's not intentional. It's
premeditated.
Not, it's not premeditated, but that he did use excessive force to kill somebody at the same time. So I suppose Audrey had given interviews then while Dave was in prison, saying that obviously it wasn't Dean's fault what happened to him. She loved him, but that he had a lot of problems, that, he had drug issues, and, that he had the knife. But then Dean's partner at the time, because Dean had a young, and the mother of his child, he had a young child when he died. She had given interviews to us as well years ago, saying that, I think on the day, or saying that basically that Dave Mahon was an animal, and that, how he should serve a long time in prison, and that, what happened, it wasn't Dean that was the aggressor. And then, Amy and Dean's aunt on the father's side, so Audrey was separated from Amy and Dean's father, Christopher, and she has really been the forefront of the campaign to find Amy. But in the wake of Dave Mahon's conviction for killing Dean, she gave interviews and she said that, how would Audrey know that Dean had the knife, because she wasn't there. And also that apparently Dave had called Dean and his then partner like 16 times that day, and that he was drunk and that he was looking for him and angry. So obviously, Dean isn't alive to tell his story, but that certainly isn't what his loved ones think.
It's a very strong bond between a man who is convicted of killing your son, and I mean, people would raise a few eyebrows that she has stood by him so much, and she waited for him to come out of prison.
She did, yeah.
She's left with no children.
No.
Both are gone.
They don't have children together, no.
And back to Amy Fitzpatrick, I always think this is such a sad case, because she was only 15 years of age and she seemed troubled at the time.
Yeah.
She went missing. She was having difficulty settling down over there, and I think she was there was reports she was kind of out and about in pubs and this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And she basically, her mother, Audrey, and Dave Mahon took control, didn't they, of the campaign to find her, and that was their introduction to the media, really, because it was a big story.
It was
a 15-year-old going missing.
It was.
We were talking about it the other day, weren't we? And you were sort of saying you feel it's almost forgotten. Is it because it was in Spain?
Yeah, it's kind of one of those funny ones. I don't know if it's just because it was in Spain. Obviously, that's part of it, but I don't know if it's because, obviously things happened then afterwards with
the complex family relations.
And the complex family relations. There was obviously acrimony. There's obviously gaps there, and even, Christopher, so the father of Amy, his sister has said how, he wasn't actually formally told by the Spanish police that Amy was disappeared. She was there with her mother and stepfather. So, yeah, I think those kind of things as well. And then, the Christine Kenny, that's, the father's sister, so Amy's aunt, she has given interviews saying that, she was unhappy with how Amy as an Irish citizen was treated, that she's petitioned the government. I think she did have an interview with Mahan a couple of years ago. I think he might have been the Minister for Foreign Affairs then, and she was happy with that, but she was basically saying that she didn't feel like a lot was done by the government. I suppose you have that distance gap, then you have, the demographic and the fact that, you have families that are maybe
different voices coming from the family,
and different theories.
Yes.
And obviously, because Audrey has given an interview to, I think it was New Talk, Pat Kenny a couple of years ago, herself and Dave, where they said that, they denied that they were ever suspects, and they said that they were only ever seen as witnesses by the police, that they cooperate with the Spanish police. Whereas Christine Kenny, Amy's aunt on the other side, would have a different story because they were never really cooperated with by the Spanish police. Because they
how did they feel they needed to come forward and suggest they were never suspects? Who was levelling that accusations against them?
Well, I think there was just a lot of things being said, because she was a 15-year-old girl, and that, there was friends obviously, the friends that she was with gave interviews. There was other people. I think there was a woman, she was an older friend of Amy's, and she had written letters to Spanish authorities saying that Amy was sleeping rough and that Amy was at risk. And there was different theories about, Amy was last seen on the way home. She was obviously going home to her parents. She was a minor. She was in their care. So I suppose those kind of things is just, and sometimes obviously wrongly, sometimes these things you can put two and two together and go, oh well, they must be. So I suppose there was a lot of those kind of theories being flung around, and if you kind of join all those dots together, maybe that's what you would come up with. But they've always denied that, and there's never been any citing, any evidence, any information to what happened to Amy. So.
And do you recall what happened back then? I don't think I was ever really covering this story, but I mean, was it a blanket search of the area? What did the police do? How long did the investigation continue for? Remember at one point, I think it was Dave Mahon had made suggestions that she was, kidnapped by a criminal. I think he was actually pointing the finger at a known hitman, was supposed to have had an involvement, or he had been met by somebody who told him this.
Yeah.
One of the Wilsons.
Eric Lucky Wilson.
He suggested was possibly involved in this. But a 15-year-old goes missing, and you'd like to think that in a European country, the case would remain open, that there'd be still some active investigation going on, and that they haven't given up hope of finding her.
No, but I think it's probably the... there's been, as you said, because the two families aren't obviously on the same, singing from the same hymn sheet. So we're hearing their, we're hearing Amy's aunt and Amy's father through his sister, their side, that they don't believe that the Spanish authorities have done much, that they did petition the Irish government. And we haven't heard, I suppose, over the years, the relationship maybe between certain elements of the media and Amy and Dave have broken down because of all of the stories that we've written about Dave Mahon and his convictions and stuff. So we don't really we don't hear from them on their side of what anymore in terms of are they still involved in the investigation? We assume they are, and we assume that it hasn't been closed.
Well, he has said in this interview that he's done with Paul Healy that he's looking for his passport back, and he wants to go back and reignite the investigation into Amy Fitzpatrick's, the fact that she's missing. I think the most shocking, really, apart from the 15-year-old dying, was when that incident happened with Dean. I mean, that was just unbelievable, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. It was shocking, I suppose, because of the tragic circumstances of the family, like that, they'd already suffered this loss with Amy, and then I suppose he was getting on with his life. He was had a partner and a child, and then this happens. And as you said earlier, it is, I suppose a lot of people would struggle to get their head around that the mother of a guy has stayed with his killer, but she has said since Dave went to prison and since he's got out that, he's a good man, that she was trying to say that, he was trying to take the knife off Dean. Obviously that's been countered by Dean's other relatives. So, it's just a complicated situation. And you don't want to judge, but it is a difficult one to get your head around.
And she settled down while he was in prison in Carrick-on-Shannon, which is where this incident happened after he was released from prison in 2021 with the pensioner. Again, a complex kind of a story, a little bit confusing. He was up and down before the courts, he says 22 times. He describes that this cost the taxpayer a fortune, that everyone's out to get him. But the fact of the matter was, it did take a long time for this case to come to court. And in that time, a lot of the witnesses fell away, and the victim himself tried to, take back his statement and then wasn't in a position to give evidence when the case came up. So, it looks like it went with Mahan in this circumstances.
Yeah, it was 2021, and so I suppose to say what happened that evening was that Jim Fahey, he's the alleged victim in the case, that he and a couple of other friends were enjoying a few drinks. It was a lovely evening. It was August, and they invited the neighbours from a couple of doors down who were Audrey and Dave. They came down, and someone went to the shop, and Jim was trying to put on a barbecue, and in court, Dave's defence tried to say that himself and another friend were too drunk to put on the barbecue, and this is where the row. But he told us, so a couple of days after this incident, Patrick O'Connell from the Sunday World called up and did a full interview with Jim.
Oh, with Jim Fahey.
Yeah,
right,
but we
okay.
weren't able to run that until last week because Dave was charged very quickly, and it was a serious charge, assault causing harm. So we've held that interview and we ran it on Sunday in the wake of the case being dismissed. So Jim said his version of events was that they couldn't get the barbecue working, so they started grilling it, and then that there was
the sausages.
Yeah, and that basically Dave was making some comments, and then that he said to Audrey, we're leaving, and then he accused Jim of saying something to Audrey. And Dave claims that this was something that you couldn't repeat, but Jim had said, that this wasn't the case. So essentially, Jim was saying he put his hand up, and that because he thought Dave was moving his head back, and he headbutted him, and then he hit him several times on the ground. And we have photographs, we have videos on SundayWorld.com of the injuries that Jim suffered back in 2021. But then in court, Dave had said that it was self-defense, that Jim actually struck the first blow, and that all he was doing was slagging him, saying, you're taking so long, we're going to have to go to McDonald's, we're starving. And that he said he did headbutt him, but that it was in defense. The witness that did come to court, who said he didn't want to be there, he said that he didn't see Jim strike anybody, but he missed kind of the start of it. But he did see Dave strike him a few times, and that Jim was lying on the floor, there was blood everywhere. And then Dave left. So he was charged quite quickly. But before that happened, he did an interview with Pat and he did a video, and his injuries were very shocking, a lot of facial injuries. And he said that basically he served time in the Lebanon, and that he'd rather be back in the Lebanon than living beside Dave Mahon. That, he was basically living in fear, that, he belonged in prison, all of these things. Now, the statement in court that was read out by Dave Mahon's defence was basically saying that, he was okay now with the situation and that he didn't want to continue. But this was his reaction in direct aftermath of that alleged assaults back in 2021. So, that it was a lengthy interview, and, he was very shook by it, and the injuries were quite stark. But I suppose ultimately he's been acquitted of that. And
they've stayed living there. He's been under curfew.
Yeah, they've stayed living there. She was living there for several years while he was in prison. They had been living in, I think they're, is it the Clare Hall kind of area, Dublin? They're from originally, is Audrey. And then they moved back to Dublin, and then she relocated to Carrick-on-Shannon. So that's where they're living currently. And I think they're still there. I remember when when Dave was getting out of prison, he got out of prison just shortly before that alleged attack. And, we spoke to neighbours around there, and they weren't too happy about a killer coming back, but he seems to be there now. And, obviously some of the witnesses didn't want to give evidence. So we don't know whether things have died down or what's the situation is, but they still seem to be there anyway.
And he says he's not a violent man. Anyone who knows him knows that. And he has continued with that story about the insult being levelled at Audrey, and he was sort of just defending her honour and then defending himself yet again. So that case has not, as of yet, been upgraded to a murder. Her father, Christopher Fitzpatrick, actually just in January gone, when she was 17 years missing, did appeal to anybody to contact the family directly. Yeah. Here in Ireland, if they have any information.
Yeah, because Christine Kenny, so Christopher's sister, has been outside the Dáil on several different occasions and has called for that review into the...
A kind of cold case review.
A cold case review. And they've said, that they believe there was actually remains found near that area in Spain not too long ago, like in the last 2 years, I think. And it was, I believe, an older woman, but Christine Kenny actually said that she'd hoped it was Amy, because they just want to be able to, they believe she's dead, and they just want to be able to return her, bury her with her brother. And, while the case is still open as far as we're aware, like it is, as we were saying earlier, I think it's because the direct communication seems to be between the Spanish authorities and Audrey and Dave, because they were there. I'm not saying that Christine Kenny hasn't had any contact with them, but she has been critical of them. And, there has been, talk of stables. I think it's about 10 minutes from where Amy disappeared. There was information that possibly she was buried there. I don't think that's been searched. We actually went out there a couple of years ago, and It seems to be kind of largely shut down and stuff like that, and there wasn't much knowledge of Amy or the case there. So there is kind of theories and they're getting information, but I suppose there has been frustration over the years that not all of it has been acted on, and I suppose because it's a different police force, it's a different country, different language, we're not fully sure what has and hasn't been done. So I suppose
it sounds like a case that's crying out for a cold case review.
It does,
doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
You know, 17 years on, it sounds like there's probably a lot there to be garnered, going back at it and trying to retrace the movements and find witnesses and
and with the cooperation now between police forces, I wonder is there a case for a liaison person to be sent over because she is an Irish citizen, you know, and she was a minor, and maybe they have done what they feel is they can for her, but I don't know if the families agree with that. So it would be great because it is a very tragic case. She just kind of seems to, it was a lot of attention at the time, but it has died down, and obviously it's a different country and there's different circumstances there. So it would be great to see if they could get assistance maybe over there from an Irish police force.
Poor Amy. So as I say, anybody with information, contact her family here, the Fitzpatricks, her father Christopher and her aunt
Christine
Kenny.
Yeah.
Thanks, Eimear.
Thanks, Nicola.
Robbie Lawler was out of control.
This is Double Cross, the murder of Robbie Lawler.
It was going to be an all-out war with him in the middle of it.
A Crime World special investigation podcast based on my new book, Web of Betrayal, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Nicola Tallant and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.